Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating paradox about how we operate. You know how sometimes the absolute hardest work you do actually feels totally effortless? Well, we're going to explore a timeless psychological concept that completely shifts how we view effort, discipline, and where we truly place our focus. Let's start right here. Picture this. You've just worked for 5 hours straight, and you haven't reached for your phone even once. You're not restless, you're not exhausted, you're just completely dialed in. Experiencing this isn't just about having a highly productive day. It's actually a massive signal about your psychological alignment, and it's evidence that something fundamental is working perfectly in the background of your mind. Think of your mind as having this quiet internal dashboard. When you lose track of time like that, without constantly itching for a distraction, that dashboard is basically lighting up. It's telling you that your work is meeting some of your deepest human needs, things like autonomy, competence, and meaning. You aren't just burning fuel here, you're literally generating it. Now, I know most of us are trained a bit differently, right? We're taught to measure the value of our work by how much discomfort we can endure. And look, let's be totally clear. Endurance is an amazing, deeply necessary trait. If you're caregiving, tackling brutal exams, or pushing a massive project over the finish line, the ability to just grind through fatigue, that's a virtue we all absolutely rely on. But, and this is where it gets really interesting, there's a hidden risk inside that exact virtue. When we get a little too good at tolerating the stuff that drains us, our internal dashboard actually breaks. Our strength literally becomes a cage. We get so incredibly skilled at suppressing our own hesitation and just powering through that our own quiet desires become completely impossible to hear. It's this classic trap that so many reliable, high-achieving people fall into. I love how this thought captures it perfectly. The problem is not that disciplined people lack passion, but that they can function without it for too long. If you can succeed entirely by just enduring pressure, then overriding your own boredom just becomes your normal default setting. And over time, you become totally blind to what actually brings you alive. To really grasp the psychology here, let's contrast two different ways of working. On one side, we have controlled motivation. This is work fueled by external pressure, maybe fear, or just pure obligation. Operating like this feels exactly like pushing against sandpaper. It's a constant grinding effort. But on the other side, autonomous motivation. This pulls you along naturally, kind of like a flowing river. It's still hard work, for sure, but it is entirely self-endorsed. So the key concept we're looking at is psychological aliveness. When your work supports those core needs we mentioned, when you actually feel capable, connected, and in the driver's seat, your attention doesn't have to be violently dragged back to the task every 5 minutes. The task itself carries enough meaning and enough of a challenge to keep your mind willingly, voluntarily involved. And how do you spot this? Well, a deeply voluntary task doesn't always show up with, dramatic fireworks or overwhelming joy. Actually, it usually appears as this quiet, sustained energy, rather than depleted compliance. You'll notice way fewer urges to just escape the moment. You'll have much more patience for messy, complex problems. And surprisingly enough, you'll actually want to return to the work the next day without anyone forcing you. Which brings us to a seriously powerful diagnostic tool for your own life. We really need to move past the whole guilt trip of asking, did I check my phone too much today? Scratch that. Instead, we need to ask a much more revealing question. What was I trying to escape from? Because here's the thing. When a task is stressful or vague or something you're secretly resisting, your mind doesn't just sit there comfortably. It wants out. It immediately looks for a quick hit of emotional regulation through tiny distractions. Your phone essentially becomes a psychological escape hatch from work that feels like that sandpaper we talked about earlier. So the phone test isn't really a test of your willpower at all. It's a test of your environment. If you find yourself in a situation where you're working for hours without once craving a shortcut out of reality, you've just collected some massive data. You've found a task that isn't producing internal friction. It might be incredibly demanding, but it is absolutely not psychologically aversive. Okay, so how do we actually use this? Instead of putting this huge, vague pressure on yourself to find your true passion, which, let's be honest, can feel totally paralyzing, let's try a simple life design experiment. Think of it as a low-friction approach where you simply start collecting evidence directly from your own attention. Think of these steps as gently opening doors to new, quiet experiments in your week. First, try tracking your energy, not just your time. After you finish a task, ask yourself, am I alive, neutral, or totally drained? Second, watch for your voluntary return. Do you actually want to go back to it? And third, start running small, low-risk trials. Schedule just 2 hours or have one prototype conversation to test out an alternative path. You don't have to just stick forever with what you can merely tolerate.
And this perfectly highlights a really vital distinction. Seeking meaningful work is absolutely not about chasing comfort. The work is still going to be frustrating. It'll be boring sometimes and really difficult. But we have to learn to separate the difficulty that is internally corrosive, the kind that just wears you down, from the difficulty that invites you in and asks for your best self. Believe me, they feel fundamentally different.
Now, finding this alignment isn't just about cultivating a pleasant, happy feeling. It gives you a massive, practical advantage. When you operate with voluntary attention, you learn so much faster, you persist longer, and you solve problems way more originally. Why? Because you aren't wasting half your cognitive energy constantly negotiating with your own internal resistance. So the next time you stumble upon a task that makes you lose track of the clock, that makes you completely forget your phone exists, please do not dismiss it as just a lucky mood or a random good day. Treat it as incredibly precious data. Protect it, study it, and ask yourself this beautiful question: how can I design my life to make more of that specific energy useful to others? As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, profound thought to take into your next workday. When you look at the task sitting in front of you, remember this: the question is not whether you can endure it, but whether it invites your whole attention. Thanks so much for joining me to unpack these ideas. Now go out there and see what your attention is trying to tell you.